The truth does not always lie in what is exposed. Sometimes it hides within the gaps, in the things that have been intentionally erased. When the name Yu Manglong appears pervasively on social media, the question is no longer simply about who he is or what he did. The deeper question is why a human being can gradually disappear from the public space, leaving behind countless fragmented pieces and a silence that is suspiciously prolonged. In a parallel world created by the community's own hands, Yu Manglong is still alive. There, he leisurely rides his bicycle through sun-drenched streets or quietly plays the cello in a tranquil room. Those images are not merely a comfort. They reflect a collective effort to hold on to the feeling that a human being was not swept away too easily, that his existence cannot be erased by just a few brief announcements and long periods of silence. From his name plastered on car windows to human rights posters appearing in Europe and over 730,000 online signatures, Yu Manglong has gradually become the symbol of a massive, unanswered question. This is no longer a mere entertainment story. It touches upon a profound sense of insecurity regarding the right to live, the limits of silence, and the price an individual may have to pay when standing before a closed power structure. What prevents the public from turning away is the feeling that signals for help, however vague, had once appeared. Old videos are rewatched and ignored live streams are excavated with unprecedented focus. Bloodshot eyes, trembling voices, and pauses without explanation are placed side by side to search for meaning. The question no longer revolves around how he behaved as an individual, but rather what kind of environment made those signals so hopeless. When official channels remain silent, public opinion steps into that void. Social media becomes a place of both commemoration and investigation. There, people attempt to piece together fragmented information to create a more complete picture. But that picture does not only reflect the fate of an artist. It also reflects how a system can operate in the shadows, where power, interests, and silence walk hand in hand for a long time without being questioned. Yet, behind the layers of glamour, behind the intermittent explanations and incomplete rebuttals, what mechanism is truly operating behind this story? Who is the beneficiary of that silence? Who is pushed into a dead end, and why can these structures persist so stubbornly? To answer this, one must go further than surface images and trace every minute sign to understand how a human being can be caught in an invisible vortex, and how the entertainment world operates when the stage lights no longer reach the darkest corners. The first signs, if separated from the overall context, might be seen merely as unusual moments for an artist under professional pressure. In an industry that is inherently harsh and competitive, fatigue or momentary emotional expressions are often not considered rare. However, when these details are placed side by side over a sufficiently long period, they begin to form a pattern that many people cannot ignore. One of the most mentioned fragments is a painting video that was widely circulated. In that video, Yu Manglong holds a pen and asks viewers to guess the content of the drawing. He draws two familiar animals called by names associated with his personal life. At first glance, this is a simple moment, even colored with innocence, like many other daily contents that artists share to create a sense of closeness with the audience. But for those who have followed him for years, the difference quickly becomes apparent. The drawing style in this video is not like the paintings he had published previously. It is not just a change in technique or creative inspiration, but a sense of fragmentation and a lack of coherence, as if the person holding the pen is struggling to complete an action that they are not fully in control of. Some viewers describe that forced feeling as a sign of prolonged tension rather than a free artistic experiment. From there, many different interpretations began to emerge. Some believe that within the drawing exist metaphorical details, even a familiar sequence of numbers often associated with emergency hotlines. This interpretation has no official confirmation and is highly speculative in nature. However, the fact that such a hypothesis spread rapidly shows the level of vigilance that is formed within the community. The public is not just watching the video, they are reading it as a message that might have been encoded, as an effort to say what cannot be said directly. The audio in the video also became a detail to be dissected. Many noted that the voice has an unusually hollow and echoing quality, unlike a typical domestic living space. Some suggest it is merely a recording technical issue. Others question the actual context of the filming. These remarks in themselves are not evidence. But when similar questions continuously arise, the focus is no longer on right or wrong, but on the feeling that the circumstances of the video might be more complex than what was presented. These suspicions were further reinforced when looking back at performances and live streams in the subsequent period. At a performance event in the year 2020, many audience members present noticed that Yu Manglong's mental state was unusual. Bloodshot eyes, an out-of-sync gaze, and a singing voice that trembled as if he had to exert immense effort to finish every sentence. In an industry where artists are trained to hide personal emotions, such expressions rarely appear unintentionally before a crowd. A few months later, during a live stream, he appeared again with red eyes and repeatedly mentioned familiar names associated with his private life. At one moment, he said that he apologized to it, but offered no explanation. To an outsider, that sentence might just be an off-topic remark. But in the live space, where every gaze and every pause is magnified, that sentence left an indelible echo. Sorry for what, and sorry to whom, are questions that have no answers. Throughout that broadcast, Yu Manglong glanced toward those around him several times, as if searching for a reaction or permission. The climax came when he suddenly asked loudly whether people could behave like human beings or not. This statement was quickly clipped out of context and went viral online. Some thought he was reacting to negative comments from the audience. Others believed those words were not directed at the online community, but at those present off-camera, those who have the ability to control the space and the rhythm of the live stream. There is no evidence strong enough to confirm which interpretation is correct. However, the very existence of multiple meanings for the same moment shows that the level of ambiguity had become a permanent state in how the public received his image at this stage. That ambiguity did not appear naturally. It was nurtured by the context, by indirect information, and by the feeling that there were things not allowed to be spoken directly. When similar signals appear repeatedly in different contexts, the possibility that they are just random coincidences becomes less convincing to many people. From here, the core question gradually forms. Were those expressions spontaneous reactions of an individual under psychological pressure, or were they the result of a long process of being placed in a strictly controlled environment? There is no simple answer. But the raising of this question marked an important shift in how the story was perceived. At this stage, the important thing is not to conclude right or wrong, but to recognize a reality. When an individual cannot clearly state what they are facing, indirect expressions become the only remaining language. And when that language is ignored or interpreted in the most convenient way, the gap between the human being and the system begins to widen. Yu Manglong, in the eyes of many, stood on that fragile boundary where every action could be read in many directions, but none brought true resolution. When Yu Manglong's personal signs were no longer viewed as isolated moments, the story moved into another phase where the focus no longer lay on a single individual. That was the moment public opinion stepped in. From that moment, every detail was placed under the microscope of social media, and the public space transformed into a giant forum where emotions, memories, and suspicions were simultaneously amplified. This intervention happened rapidly and almost without a buffer. Timelines in Yu Manglong's past were unearthed, not for the purpose of nostalgia, but to search for signs. The period when he was still a high school student became one of the starting points. Information that seemed harmless, such as participating in a hosting competition organized by a university and winning an award, was suddenly placed in a new context. The public noticed the interruption in his academic path, the one-year delay in entering university, and the decision to pivot toward the entertainment path. In the current tense atmosphere, those turning points were no longer seen as pure personal choices, but were reread as fateful bends. From here, connections began to be drawn. A number of figures who had appeared in his past were mentioned with increasing frequency. An influential director in the entertainment industry became the focus of discussions, not because of a confirmed specific act, but because of the position of power that person held during a sensitive period. In the psychology of the crowd, when a story has taken on an uneasy color, every relationship can be reread with a suspicious gaze. It is noteworthy that these suspicions do not stand alone, but are placed within a larger chain of reasoning about power structures and a lack of transparency. The wave of public opinion did not stop at figures from the past. Live streams of other artists were also scrutinized. Every sentence and emotional reaction was clipped out of its original context and placed alongside images of Yu Manglong. A strange statement in a live broadcast, which previously was only seen as a slip of the tongue, suddenly became a hotspot of controversy. The moment the speaker realized the inappropriateness of their words and blamed themselves right on air, only increased the feeling that there are things that cannot be fully spoken. Parallel to this, another young artist was pulled into the eye of the storm when he continued to appear on major stages and commercial programs. In the eyes of a segment of the public, this presence was seen as a sign of injustice. Calls for boycotts, reports, and demands for authorities to intervene appeared densely. For those who believe that Yu Manglong's story reflects a systemic issue, this was the only way to exert pressure and force the truth to be clarified. Conversely, for those more cautious, that wave carried the risk of collective condemnation, where emotion overrides evidence. Two opposing streams of public opinion gradually formed clearly. One side argued that the details, however small, when woven together, painted an alarming picture of manipulation and invisible violence in the entertainment industry. For them, indignation was a natural reaction to a system believed to have abandoned a human being. The other side warned of the danger of over-inference, emphasizing that attaching every unusual behavior to a single script could harm uninvolved parties. They argued that while justice must be pursued, it cannot rely entirely on emotions and speculation. In this context, social media clearly revealed its dual nature. It allowed voices that were once ignored to be heard, but at the same time, it amplified fear and suspicion. Comparisons of before and after images, slow-motion videos, and meticulously analyzed screenshots of status updates created an unceasing flow of information. For every participant, sharing an article or a comment brought a sense of contributing to the search for the truth. But in total, that flow could also carry along unverified judgments. The impact of this wave of public opinion on the implicated artists was immediate and clear. Schedules were canceled, public images changed, and psychological pressure increased. Even apologies no longer brought solace. In the tense atmosphere, every statement could be interpreted in an unfavorable direction. A career built over many years could be shaken in a short time, not necessarily because of a specific act, but because of being placed at the center of a story larger than the person themselves. It is noteworthy that throughout that storm of public opinion, Yu Manglong was present only indirectly. He did not speak up to respond, nor did he appear to protect or explain himself. This very absence increased the symbolic weight of the story. For many, he became the image of an individual unable to speak before a complex structure where every reaction could be controlled or distorted. At this stage, the story has moved far beyond the boundaries of a specific case. It has become a test for how society reacts to suspicions of power and responsibility. Public opinion can be a driving force for transparency, but it can also become uncompromising pressure. The line between demanding justice and creating collective fear becomes thinner than ever. When there is no mechanism for official and transparent dialogue, the information gap continues to be filled with emotions and speculation. And when that happens, not just an individual or a small group is affected, but the entire ecosystem of the entertainment industry and social trust are placed before a massive question about how power is being operated and monitored. It is within this chaos that signs of a deeper level of issues begin to emerge, leading the story toward a structural stalemate. As the controversies on social media had yet to subside, the focus of the story gradually shifted away from individual expressions and the emotional reactions of the public. A deeper level began to emerge, where contractual relationships, financial obligations, and power structures operate silently but persistently. This is the stage that many describe as the darkest hour, for it shows that the sense of stalemate comes not only from mental pressure, but from legal and economic ties that offer almost no escape. According to widely circulated information, Yu Manglong was allegedly facing massive financial obligations, with the figures mentioned far exceeding an individual's ability to pay, even when that person was at the peak of their career. The origin of these obligations was described as stemming from contracts signed during the time he was under strict management. In the context of the entertainment industry, artists often do not directly control all legal terms, but depend on a team of representatives. When projects do not yield expected profits, responsibility is not distributed back to the decision makers, but is heaped upon the shoulders of the person standing in the spotlight. Breach of contract clauses became a concept that drew particular public attention. The figures mentioned carried a deterrent quality, large enough to turn every choice into a risk. Continuing or withdrawing both brought heavy financial consequences. In those circumstances, freedom of choice became a faint concept. The artist was placed in a trapped position where every step could lead to irreversible loss. Without the need for an explicit command, the very structure of the contract created an effective form of control. Along with legal ties were personal financial relationships alleged to be lacking transparency. A loan was mentioned as a symbol of the power imbalance in the backstage. When reclaiming it became impossible and was denied, the feeling of being exploited was further reinforced in the public perception. Although this information has not been confirmed by legal authorities, its appearance within the same narrative contributed to a picture of an environment where benefits and responsibilities are not fairly distributed. At that time, Yu Manglong was seen as an individual locked in from many sides. On one side were financial and legal obligations. On the other was the clear decline in resources and professional opportunities. Performance opportunities dwindled, projects were no longer announced, and the silence of the involved parties persisted. In the entertainment industry, that silence sometimes carries more weight than any statement. It creates an information gap where those inside cannot speak, and those outside do not know what to believe. It was from that gap that the story began to expand beyond the scope of a specific artist. Accounts from people who once worked in the field of arts education were brought forward as a worrying backdrop. According to them, power in the training environment does not just stop at assessing capacity or granting opportunities, but directly influences the student's future path. When that power is not monitored, it can turn into a tool of exchange, where silence is viewed as a condition for continued existence. The concept of the spiral of silence was gradually used to describe this state. Young people, while still in the school environment, learn to adapt to unwritten rules. Parents, fearing for their children's futures, choose not to speak up. Those within the system, out of interest or fear, continue to maintain that state. When entering the entertainment industry, these individuals carry the old lesson. Resistance means being eliminated, while silence is the path of least risk. In that context, the fact that Yu Manglong was believed to have shown signs of resistance, even if only indirectly, made him different. This difference, in the eyes of many, was not an advantage, but a risk. A closed system is often intolerant of those who do not follow its operational logic. The price of not being completely silent was described as too great for an individual, especially when there is no strong enough protective mechanism. The climax of this stage did not lie in a single event, but in the awareness gradually forming in society. Yu Manglong was no longer seen merely as an artist encountering a crisis, but as a mirror reflecting the deeper issues of the entertainment industry and arts education. His story raised difficult questions about the boundary between management and control, the responsibility of organizations, and who truly bears responsibility when an individual is pushed to the limit. At this point, separating what was a personal tragedy and what was the consequence of a structure spanning many years became almost impossible. Overlapping layers of power, hard-to-see interests, and a lack of transparency created an environment in which resistance was rarely protected. Yu Manglong, in this story, stood at the center of an issue larger than himself, where every detail told not only of a person's fate but of how a system operates when there is no full light shining upon it. As the noise gradually subsides, the story of Yu Manglong does not close with a final verdict or a full explanation. Instead, it leaves a lasting aftershock, where silence is sometimes heavier than any justification. He was not just an artist who once appeared on stage and screen. He has become a symbol for the fragility of human beings when facing power structures that lack transparency and are difficult to access. Throughout this journey, what emerged clearly was not the right or wrong of an individual, but the growing gap between the human being and the system. Personal expressions, public reactions, and overlapping contractual ties have painted a picture where responsibility is dispersed and the individual voice is gradually blurred. In the absence of an official dialogue mechanism, silence becomes a prolonged state, and in that state, people are easily pushed to the limit, without anyone truly stepping up to take responsibility. This story also poses a great challenge to society. The boundary between discipline and intrusion, between management and the control of personal life, is not always clearly defined. In environments where power is concentrated and lacks oversight, silence can become a condition for survival, while resistance, even at the smallest level, carries great risk. Yu Manglong, in collective memory, thus becomes an open question about the price of not being completely silent. What is worth reflecting on is that this story does not just reflect a specific individual or industry. It touches on the broader issue of how society confronts the dark corners of power. When public opinion speaks out, it can be a driving force for transparency, but it can also become uncontrollable emotional pressure. Conversely, when organizations choose silence, the information gap will continue to be filled with speculation. In both cases, the absence of a transparent and dialogue-based mechanism remains the core weakness. Yu Manglong, after all, will perhaps forever exist in the public memory as an incomplete symbol. Not because he represents a clear conclusion, but because he evokes questions that society is not yet ready to answer. Where is the responsibility of systems? How is the right to speak protected? And whether similar tragedies will continue to repeat in other forms. The future of this story remains open. Change, if any, does not come from a single individual, but from the collective choice of society, to continue in silence or to look directly at unstable structures to adjust and better protect human beings. Because in the end, what remains is not fame or scandal, but the value of a human being who once existed, who once yearned to be heard, and who left behind a question mark that we cannot easily ignore.